The questioning begins at 10 o'clock this morning inside of the hearing room at Dirksen. The Senate Judiciary Committee will hear testimony from Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, the woman accusing Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault when they were both teenagers. Then senators will hear from Judge Kavanaugh. The case has, quite honestly, just gotten uglier and more complex in recent days as more women have stepped forward to accuse Kavanaugh of inappropriate behavior. And joining us now to try to sort through it all is Fred Lawrence, distinguished lecturer at Georgetown Law, also CEO of the Phi Beta Kappa Society. Good to see you once again.
Good morning. Good to be back.
So on the surface right now, what do you think we will see this morning?
Well, I think we're going to see a little bit of testimony and a lot of political theater. We'll hear from both of them. My guess is that they will both be very compelling in their own way. You're going to see a skilled prosecutor cross-examine Dr. Ford. That could be very effective because there's going to be a lot of questions to which she's going to have to say, I don't know. But the talk that she gives about what happened to her, I suspect, will be very compelling. Judge Kavanaugh will get up, and he's got a slightly more complicated position because his story has started to shift. His initial story was nothing, ever, never. And now the story is a little more, look, I did things I wish I hadn't done, but I didn't do this. You could do either of those stories, but when your story starts to shift, it's more complicated.
There are some on the outside who say just simply by bringing in this sex crimes prosecutor, this is becoming to look more like a criminal trial than a Senate hearing.
I think that's right, and I think the fact that the senators have felt that they can't play this role shows you that this thing in many ways has kind of come off the rails. It's too late for the question you might ask me, which is this the best way to do this? But you still have to wonder whether we wouldn't be better taking our foot off the gas, letting this take place in a hearing, not on TV, not everybody watching. Let the FBI do the thing they do, report that back to the Senate, and let everybody take a breather, because the temperature is just too hot on this one right now.
What will you specifically be watching for to come out in today's testimony that could sway things one way or the other?
I'm going to be watching the senators more than I'm watching the two of them. I'm going to see what their demeanor is. I'm going to see how it lands with them. If Dr. Ford comes off as believable, I think that's a big challenge for a number of senators. At the same time, Judge Kavanaugh, I'm sure, is going to sound very compelling. He's a very well-regarded, bright, able person. We were last together, a week or two ago, and you asked me, what do I think is going to happen? Will he be confirmed? And I said, except for a bolt from the blue, absolutely. Well, we've had a lot of bolts from the blue. The bolts keep coming right now. Obviously, today, this is Dr. Ford's turn in front of the committee. But we have heard from other women. Most recently, we just heard from another woman yesterday on the record, represented by Michael Avenatti, who you know. I do. Michael was a student at GW Law School. That was before the time I was dean, but he was a distinguished alumnus. In fact, I gave him a Distinguished Alumni Award at the time. If you said, what are we recognizing him for? I would have said his work as a class action lawyer. He was very generous to GW Law School. I will say his reputation as a student was absolutely top shelf. He worked with my colleague Jonathan Turley, who many of your viewers probably know, and Turley thought very highly of him. Very bright, able guy.
It's become obviously it's a partisan issue. It's become quite political theater. The stage obviously set today for these hearings. Democrats would like nothing more in this case than to delay as much as possible to get things past the midterm. Republicans don't want that to happen, but at the same time also run the risk of pushing through something that could be looked back on unfavorably. What are the risks here involved from either side?
I think there are enormous risks for both sides, and I really think, I know this is going to sound kind of old-fashioned, but it would be good to hear somebody talking about what's best for the country, talking about what's best for this party or that party. That's never the way we've talked about the Supreme Court. And right now, how do we get that back on the rails is very important. But I think the risks for the Republicans of looking like they're overstepping and being vituperative in their questioning of a very compelling witness is a big risk. For the Democrats, looking like they're slowing down a process to appoint the justice is a big risk. Like to hear somebody talk about what would be best for the country right now.
A lot of people obviously making the reference back years ago when we go back to Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill. Anything from that we can put in modern day?
Well, one thing we did learn from that, and it wasn't all handled well, that's for sure. There was a very thorough FBI investigation, and they had over a dozen, I think maybe 20 witnesses they called. So that was an example of what worked well. What really did not work well was that Senate questioning. And what really did not work well was the fact that there were more corroborative witnesses who were never called. And I think to this day, you ask the people in that committee, including the former Vice President, Joe Biden, he'll tell you he regrets that.
Finally, for today, we did mention this is Dr. Ford's day. There are other accusers. Might there be a way for them to essentially testify at some point, or has that book been closed?
You know, I don't say never anymore because this process keeps evolving as we go. I think there was a possibility to have that happen offline. I think what should happen is Senate investigators should reach out to those people. There should be no rush to confirm here. The only reasons to have a rush here are political ones. The ones that deal with the legitimacy of the Supreme Court do not call for rushing. And we forget that the Senate has two jobs. The one that we always talk about is to vet candidates. That's a good thing to do, an important thing to do, and we always talk about that. The second thing that we rarely talk about, the Senate right now are the custodians of the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. It's so obvious we don't think about it, but the Supreme Court does not have the military, and they don't have the power of the purse. 9 people without military, without money, they make a judgment, and we all follow it. That only works because of a sense of legitimacy. That's the genius of the Constitution. I think that's what's at stake right now.
And whoever it is that's put on that seat will serve much longer than anybody in this current administration, and most likely the next several.
That is exactly right.
Which obviously needs to be kept in mind.
We'll keep watching.
We'll be watching at 10 o'clock this morning. Thanks for joining us once again.
Pleasure.